Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the recovery room. We're looking all glammed up. This is series three, a new setup, a new look. We managed to pay a little bit extra to get a really posh room. If you don't know who the guys are, let's start from the top. Kim, if you just want to introduce yourself, what your Instagram tag is, and why you're in the recovery room.
Yay, my name is Kimberly Quinlan. My Instagram tag is at Kimberly Quinlan with Ley instead of Ly. I am an anxiety specialist in the state of California, USA.
Fantastic. Drew?
I am Drew Linsalata, creator and host of the Anxious Truth podcast and author of several books on anxiety and anxiety recovery. You can find me on Instagram at the.anxious.truth. And I'm just happy to hang out with these guys every Friday.
And last but not least, Joshua.
Hi, I'm Joshua Fletcher. I'm Anxiety Josh on Instagram. I'm a anxiety specialist here in the UK, based in Manchester, and I specialize working with various anxiety disorders like panic disorder, agoraphobia, health anxiety, etc. And I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we're happy to have you, Josh. So today's topic is overcoming daily anxiety obstacles. This was requested a lot when we put a topic request out from the community. So it's with just looking at the daily obstacles of what everyone goes through when they're in an anxiety disorder. So for myself, going through a panic disorder, my daily obstacle was shopping centres. I couldn't go to shopping centres without panic attacks occurring. Did you have any specific daily objects? Any obstacles during your anxiety disorder, Kim?
Yeah, so I had an eating disorder and generalized anxiety. So the biggest obstacles for me was, I would say, people's opinions on me, their comments on my body, or their comments on how I looked or how I was acting. And so any social interaction, particularly if food was included, that was an incredibly huge obstacle for me for years.
But how about you, Drew? Anything that pops to the mind?
I think for me, when I was really in the thick of it and going through the whole recovery process, it was probably my role as like a dad, and the demands of that, and feeling like I was letting my kids down and missing out on a bunch of stuff. That was a huge daily obstacle. Like just trying to fulfill what I felt were that role, and I wasn't doing it well, and that would weigh on me in a big way.
My daily routine sort of became my obstacle, especially when I was in the middle of a panic disorder. I used to wake up and the first thing I would think was, how can I get to the end of the day? So I was still going to work. I wasn't avoiding going to work, but every second that I was in work, I was feeling anxious. So I was having to move away from my desk to go to my safe space, which was in the toilet. I know a lot of people do that and can relate to that. But yeah, I used to literally plan out how many hours it would take me until I'd be back at home in my safe space. Does that ring any bells with you, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Dean, when we were writing our book, we shared a lot of stories about our struggles with anxiety disorders and stuff. That safe space, the agoraphobia thing a lot that we could relate to. For me, one of the biggest barriers for my recovery was probably trying to tame my inner critic. So I knew, I mean, psychoeducation really helped me. I knew about the things to do and the theory around what I needed to do to overcome my anxiety disorder. But the biggest obstacle was constantly comparing myself to my previous self, comparing myself to the old me, constantly. I wouldn't allow small gains and small goals that I achieved to have any meaning, because I'd constantly go, well, the old me wouldn't have even bothered about this. That was one of my main obstacles to recovery, and actually learning to be my friend again and be on my side was massive, I think.
Fantastic. So I want to dive into the questions because we've got quite a lot of questions from the community regarding this. Let me just get them up. I won't be a second. So someone's asking, how do I overcome tiredness and fatigue? It's a major part of their anxiety disorder. and they feel like every single day they're waking up, they want to do the things that is planned out to do, but they're just feeling tired and fatigued. Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. That was so interesting for me, the tired and fatigue thing. I had such, first of all, I've said this before, I'm a terrible sleeper anyway, so do not take sleep advice from me. But it was even worse, like when I was in the thick of things. And the biggest problem that I had was the fear of how I was going to feel not sleeping enough. Oh, we lost Josh. When he comes back, we will get him back in. Here he comes. I used to worry about how I would feel if I was too tired. And I would say things like, oh, if I don't sleep enough, which was hardly any back then, I'm just going to be completely, my anxiety will be through the roof. It's going to be a terrible day. And I really had to come to grips with the idea that my fear was just of how I felt. It had really nothing to do with sleep. Yeah, I was dragging. I was really tired because I wasn't sleeping a lot. That's true. But I was nailing that or gluing that to, well, then I'm going to panic because I don't like the way I feel when I feel tired. So I really had to confront that. And one of the things that helped me, and I think I might have told the story on another recovery room episode, I'll tell it quickly. I was sitting in the parking lot. I was out doing my driving exposure one morning, and there's a little dairy store by me. And I was sitting in that parking lot for a few minutes, panicking. And a woman got out of the car next to me, and she walked into the shop, and she was going to buy whatever she was going to buy. It was in the morning. People were heading to work, and they sell coffee and stuff. She looked like she had a hell of a night. Like she had bags under her eyes. She was dragging. Her hair was a mess. And whoever she is, I'm sorry for saying this. I have no idea who she was. And I looked at her and I thought, she looks exhausted and she doesn't care. I'm not saying she doesn't care, but she was just walking in to get her coffee and like try and get on with her day. And that was such an eye opener to me. Like, and I'm freaking out because I only slept for 3.5 hours, which isn't a lot, of course, but that was my sleep situation. I had to really confront that. Like it really didn't have anything to do with sleep. It had to do with being afraid of how I felt all the damn time. So,
Josh, I think your audio's gone off. Kim, regarding your anxiety disorder, was sleep a major part of it? So, were you getting the 7 hours recommended? And if you wasn't, was it affecting your anxiety levels?
Yeah, no, sleep is not my thing. I'm good for sleep. I'm out in about 12 seconds the minute I go to the pillow. But I'm actually on the other end in that I was chronically exhausted during my eating disorder and my generalized anxiety disorder, because worrying about things is exhausting, particularly when you put in a really good effort like I did and put in like a 24-hour a day effort. And so it was incredibly exhausting. And so, I mean, the good news is with management of your anxiety, that exhaustion does tend to lift. And so I would just generally say, like, once you can get a hold of your anxiety and cut back on those safety behaviors, that does reduce and lift some of the exhaustion. But in the earliest stages of treatment, I did a lot of just compassion work and time management, realistically, looking at my expectations on myself, because recovery is exhausting. Getting better doing the treatment can be exhausting as well. So it does require that you sort of readjust your expectations of how happy and peppy you will feel during those stages.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people in the community say they worry that they're not getting enough sleep, and it's that behavior towards thinking I'm only going to get 3 hours that actually can create the anxiety.
Yeah.
I know Josh, Matt, I know we've lost him for a second. Hopefully he'll come back.
I'll be back.
Yeah, I know he often mentions, doesn't he, that he tells his clients to try and not go to sleep and see what happens. And he often says that they end up saying that they couldn't stay awake and they end up falling asleep, which I find really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. CBT for sleep involves also setting alarms and purposely waking yourself.
Interesting.
So the gold standard treatment for sleep anxiety is, you set an alarm for 11:45 and you set an alarm for 2:45 and then you set an alarm for 4:45. And you sort of work at turning the story on its head that you can't cope with low amounts of sleep, and you'll find you can. It's not easy, but you can.
I also see people get really stuck on the fear that they are somehow damaging themselves. They're blocking their recovery. I'm never going to recover if I don't get 8 hours of sleep because I read that it's restorative and regenerative and I need sleep, or that they're literally going to physically damage themselves if they don't sleep. which then gets blown out of proportion too. So not
Yeah.
true, not true.
Yeah.
Next question, guys. What can we do between exposures? So this person feels like they're putting everything into their exposure. So after it, are they to relax? Are they to get on with their daily routine? Or are they to prepare themselves for the next exposure? I don't know, Kim, if you want to start off with that one.
Yeah, let me go. So here's the thing to remember is exposure therapy on its own is actually an older type of therapy, which we have improved extensively since exposure therapy was created. And now we add on what's called response prevention. So you can do your exposure, but then the next step is the exposure is really only as good as the response prevention. Now, response prevention is once you've done the exposure, you do not engage in safety behaviors to reduce or remove the discomfort that came from the exposure. So an example might be if you, in Drew's example, you drive, right? Once you're done with that, you then would practice not avoiding other triggers. You would practice not ruminating about the drive or about future driving. You wouldn't seek reassurance from people on how you did and how you went and did you hurt anyone and how did it go. And in addition, you wouldn't do any other physical compulsions. But the last one, you also won't punish yourself for how well it went. So what I would encourage you to do is simply go about your day, try to go about your day as well as you can, but also don't try and reduce or remove the discomfort that the exposure brought on.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well, Kim. Where you said about don't punish yourself if it hasn't gone as well as expected. Well, it takes a lot of courage to actually go out and do that thing, doesn't it? So you need to be praising yourself for that first step, which is often the hardest step.
Right.
Because we know that, like, I think it was Josh you mentioned his inner critic. We know that when we're anxious, this inner critic's really, really turned up and loud.
Right.
And it's just telling us that we're not going to recover, that we're always going to feel anxious. So, yeah, I believe in just turning that inner critic, just changing the language subtly. You're not going to believe it at first because you're in an anxious state, but continually giving your brain these patterns, there is science behind that you can change the neural pathways, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And to be honest, the more you celebrate the wins, even if the win was very small, that's actually better at increasing motivation for the next exposure than if you didn't celebrate. So the celebration actually gives you extra points for the next exposure.
Yeah. The other thing that I would add to that question, these are such good answers too, and a good question. Actually, at around 2:45, so another 25 minutes, I'm going to have a post come out on Instagram and Facebook that talks about recovery is life and life is recovery. So in the beginning, it is really common to feel like you must be doing exposures and somehow actively recovering all the time. And you forget that life is also happening. So I'll sum it up. You think that you are recovering so that you can live life. But as you go down the road, that's a common misconception at first, but as you go down the road and do the work and start to progress, you will start to understand that you're living life so you can recover. So in between exposures, just let life happen. Follow the guidelines that Kim gave you because they're dead on perfect, right? And, just let life be what it is. That might mean taking a shower or brush, or vacuuming the house or making dinner for your family, whatever it is. It's okay. You don't have to be actively recovering during every waking minute. It's not possible, nor can you do it. So,
yeah, I love that, Trey. Next question is.
Here's Josh. We got him back.
Yeah,
get him in the stream.
Hey, Josh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You're all good.
All good.
Look and fly.
Josh, I'll let you answer this question.
Josh looks like he's fed up right now. Like, this has been a long day. I'm out. Like,
how do I change the response to anxious thoughts? How to stop the sudden feeling that I get in my gut, Josh?
You're not supposed to stop the sudden feeling. Okay, it's not a nice feeling, but when and overall the long-term goal is to stop the feeling in your stomach. But you've got to go through it really and stop fearing it in order for it to stop eventually, because it sounds like whoever asked that question is fearing fear. If you fear, you're gonna get that, as Sally Winston calls it, it's the secondary fear response. So you get that, you're scared, and then you're scared about being scared. Whereas what you've got to do is teach the brain that it's okay to get that thought. So use that opportunity as a chance to practice that with that. So a bit like if you're bitten by a dog, you could slowly practice being with dogs and being near them and stroking and things like that. And once you kind of get good at that, the brain switches off the threat response in association with dogs. Same happens with that little, well, Dean and I call it a whoosh feeling. If you want to stop making the whoosh feeling so scary, then be willing to sit through it. And yeah, you practice though. You're not going to get it perfect the first time. No one ever does. I didn't. No one ever does.
Drew, do you want to add anything to that?
I can't add anything to that. It's kind of perfect. Like when the anxious thoughts happen, you just have to let them be there and work on moving through them. Always through.
Yeah. I think the thing to remember is that common saying, what you resist persists. And I found that to be very true. The more if you've got a tummy ache or any kind of physical sensation, the more you tense up around that part of your body, the more, it tends to be, number one, exhausting, but also it makes you feel like you're completely out of control. So absolutely.
Josh or Dean, you see that on the screen? Someone asked, what's the whoosh feeling?
What's the whoosh feeling? So it's that sudden feeling of alertness, of anxiety coming over your body, where you feel like, that you're in a state of panic, in a state of fear. It's that whoosh. Josh, yeah?
Yeah, it's like that dump of adrenaline. It's like a whoosh. Yeah. So like, if you've ever been on a roller coaster or watched a scary film, it's like a, and
that's the interesting thing as well, that in them settings, when you sat in the cinema watching a scary feeling, you're having the exact same response as what you would do in the office. It's just that because your behavior, because you're telling your brain, I'm sat in the cinema watching this scary movie, so it's okay to feel this way. That's why you're not getting freaked out about it. And that's the same on a roller coaster, right?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, Dean. In my OCD group today, we were talking about someone asked the question, they said, why am I when I get excited, I immediately get anxious? I'm like, well, physiologically, they're exactly the same response. It's just our interpretation of them. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when you start getting scared, you get more adrenaline and cortisol and stuff. But initially, like excitement and nervousness are exactly the same. There's no difference between them. Only sometimes you can go down a scared tangent when we misinterpret. That word misinterpret, I say that more than the word amygdala. When we misinterpret the things, that's when we can go down certain routes.
Drinking game.
Next question, guys. Good. I'm feeling strange and unfamiliar sensations. I'm not able to let them in. So they're not able to accept that they're getting them. Do you have any advice regarding this? Anyone? Drew?
Yeah. And this is always, I know people love when I do this, but my answer to that is a question. Tell me what the operational difference is between not accepting and accepting. And so I'll answer the question. None. It's there no matter what. So anxiety and anxious sensations is not a steak that comes cooked the wrong way and you send it back to the kitchen and they fix it. You can't do that. So it's there anyway. What's the difference between I accept it? You're accepting anyway. You're just not willingly accepting it because you can't make it go away anyway. So the difference is the fight. So whether you fight or don't fight, it's there anyway. You didn't stop it from coming, and you're not stopping it from sort of torturing you in a way. So the way you kind of have to do that is it's a fight thing. It's just a fight thing.
No, that's fantastic. You can use that.
I just found a new feature in the Restream. I see you guys see it too. So
I think we can all agree that I am not the master of this platform at the moment. Does not like my phone. What actually happened was I was in the stream and then using my phone, and my mum called, and then it wouldn't let me connect everything back again. So
Should have.
That's because mums are the highest priority.
That's exactly right. Your phone knows.
The interwebs know this.
So,
What a monster are you?
It was reject. No, I'll talk to you afterwards.
Hang up on your mom to talk to us. It's terrible.
Drew, just going off that point that you just made, where you said it's going to be there anyway, so you can either accept or reject. So like the power's in your hand. You can use that in the situation of someone else's behavior towards you, couldn't you? So often you get people, like if you've got a parent who's shouting at you or something, then it's their behavior and you choose how to accept that behavior because you can't change how they've been. So that parent, they may have had a bad day, they may be stressed out or whatever, and you don't know that. So yeah, taking a step back and you being able to, it's always your behavior when it comes to anxiety disorders.
Yeah. And then that whole, I can't accept it. That's a tough thing to hear people say because you have no choice. You're accepting it anyway. So just accept that you're already accepting it and sort of accept it in a more productive way. I know that's really esoteric and a little weird, but I believe that in my bones.
Someone got a Rocky in the comments says, my therapist has me doing jumping jacks whilst having a panic attack and things. I like stuff like that because that means your therapist is, and Kim and I are advocates of this, but doing interoceptive exposure. So if you're kind of panic attack, you're afraid of kind of that's a fancy feature, isn't it? Look at that. Right? When did we get professional? So I think that's good. I mean, that's a therapist that's saying, listen, no, with your behavior, show the impact, show the brain that you're not scared of anxiety. Because a lot of people think, for me personally, when people say sit with it, sit with the anxiety, no, don't. Just do what non-anxious you would do. Non-anxious you wouldn't sit with the anxiety. Non-anxious you would just go and do whatever you would be doing, But if you really want to crank up that exposure, do exactly the opposite of what he wants you to do. So if he wants you to sit, ruminate, feel scared, cocoon, fawn, then getting up and doing jumping jacks is really good, particularly if you're afraid of panic sensations. You're almost like kind of bringing them on more. You're like, come on, then make me dizzy, I'm going to make my heart rate go, make my stomach flutter, I'm going to bring it on. So yeah, I like what that therapist is doing there. They obviously know what they're talking about when it comes to anxiety and so on.
Josh, do you believe that body language and posture can have a positive effect on someone who's anxious?
I think it's sometimes posture is stuff that you've got to work on yourself, but generally your posture is usually a sign of where you're at the moment. I know I was looking back at old videos when I was going through anxiety and depression, and I was actually hunched like this. Posture wasn't the problem; it was a sign of what I was going through. Naturally, when you get more confident with anxiety and you're in a better place, your posture naturally kind of lightens because you're not holding so much tension in because of, when you talk about anxiety, you've got adrenaline and cortisol constantly pumping around your body. And to compensate for that, the major muscle groups in your body, such as your chest muscles and your stomach muscles, or if you're me, my banging biceps, they take all that energy and you go forward. And that's why everyone does. And the shoulder muscles are huge as well. And so, usually the posture's like that. But you can also have a depressive posture as well. It's usually a symptom of something. You can tell someone's depressed because they're hunched forward. They're just carrying themselves, literally kind of carrying their head through the day. So I don't bring too much attention to it. But sometimes it's nice.
The reason I ask is when I saw the grief therapist after my dad died, she mentioned what you just said about my posture being like this because I was complaining about shoulder pain and tension headaches and pain in my neck. And she said to open up the posture and almost trick the brain into having this positive body language. And she believed that there was some science behind that.
Well, there is actually. There's one that my partner often cites, is that it's been scientifically proven that if you sway your arms and imitate that of a happy person whilst walking, that will trick the brain into releasing more serotonin and dopamine.
That's
so,
interesting.
If you sway your arms when you're walking, like la 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 la, that has literally been proven. And I find it fascinating. I'm like, what? Try it. Try
Yeah.
it. Go and do it for 10 minutes. Watch what happens.
Well, often a part of the body language can be coming from a more dialectical behavioral therapy tool, which is called opposite action, which is if you're really depressed, you would engage in behaviors that are the opposite of what depressed action would be. And that's often dancing or swinging your arms, like you said, or, shoulders are back instead of your shoulders being forward. For anxiety, it might be, again, like dancing or singing or however. I mean, it can feel really silly, but that opposite action can very much shift the way that your brain is responding. Someone had said in the comments, isn't that a diversion from anxiety, right? Doing jumping jacks. And so what I would add there is, if you're doing jumping jacks to make the fear go away, well, then it probably will backfire. Whereas if you're doing the jumping jacks to willingly have the feeling, well, then you're on the right track.
Yeah, because, for example, someone who gets anxious while they're in the gym on the treadmill, they're not avoiding it if they're going on the treadmill to get that anxious feeling, are they?
Yeah. Plus, I think that person was saying that was happening in the therapist's office. Like it was an actual interceptive in the therapist's office, right? As opposed to teaching him to respond to panic with jumping jacks, because that's the context.
No, it wouldn't be. I presume it wasn't that. I can't imagine.
Right. I think it was in therapy. Yeah.
Therapists making you jumping jacks are usually a CBT therapist doing interceptive exposure.
Yeah. Right.
And they'll do, but the interceptive exposure is great, particularly for like dissociation. So like doing the opposite of what you want to do. So when people get dissociation, they'll avoid doing things like looking at mirrors or seeing people's faces or whatever. And a good CBT therapist trained in anxiety disorders will like get you to stare at your face. And I've had this personally when I went through, and I was like, whoa! And I let the whoosh come in. I was like, oh my god, I'm not here. I'm gonna lose reality. And 10 minutes later, I'm like, this just feels stupid. It means you've done what response is turned off.
Guys, next question. Can you please briefly talk about vivid dreams while going through anxiety disorders? Believe it or not, I actually got asked this question 6 times by 6 different people.
Dean, I vividly dream about you and that wonderful haircut, but I don't see that as a problem.
That's the reward. I used to dream in the thick of it. I would, and do not ask me why San Francisco was always, I like San Francisco, been there, love it, it's a great city. I would dream that I was in San Francisco, and that was completely agoraphobic, right? But I would dream that I was somehow in San Francisco, didn't know how I got there, and was absolutely terrified because now I have to find my way 3,000 miles back to New York. And I would have that dream again and again and again, and it was incredibly vivid. So I experienced that, and at first it would be a little bit, I would wake up and I'd be really out of sorts, but like everything else, this came up in my Facebook group today. So quickly, somebody said, oh, they had a tough dream and they woke up really out of sorts, and I can't handle that. And I think in that situation, when we're always on guard against our own thoughts, when we have vivid dreams that are not supposed to make any sense, we cannot make any sense of them, then we're going to see those kind of crazy dream thoughts as even worse. Like as scarier. I'm going to try to continue on while all this is happening behind me. If you guys, I love this story, but anyway,
we're so childish.
Yes, but it's okay. I'm digging it. So anyway, vivid dreams, I think, contribute to that. If you're already afraid of your thoughts and what goes through your mind, then vivid dreams are just going to fuel that even more. Just recognize that I'm already on guard against my own thoughts. So dream thoughts that aren't supposed to make any sense, that I can't figure out and I don't understand, will seem even scarier than they usually are. So it takes, that was weird, to, oh my God, that was terrible.
Did you have any vivid dreams, Kim or Josh?
About the gardener?
Well, I'm cracking up because you guys are like making jokes all the time, and I love it. I'll tell you a personal, I have not told you guys this. This is one of my fears. Is for years I've had a fear that I would accidentally cheat on my partner. Right?
How can you accidentally cheat?
I emphasize accidentally. So I remember early in my marriage, on the weekly, I would have a dream that I would wake up in a bed with some other man, but I don't remember how I got there and it just happened to get there. And then it would drive me crazy because I'd go, do I want that? What kind of person am I? Do I not love my husband? You know, all the fears. And thank goodness I didn't ever fall on a dream analysis type of therapy setting, because I want to really emphasize that dream analysis is not helpful for anxiety. My therapist was simple in saying, yeah, you deeply care about your husband and you deeply care about your marriage. So it makes complete sense that you are concerned about or have dreams about it or have thoughts during the day about it. You know, I've had multiple similar dreams. You know, this has been like I've been married nearly 20 years, and it's 20 years of cheating on my husband in my sleep, which is now a joke in my relationship of like, who did you have sex with last night? It's like a hilarious thing. But I think the thing to remember is our brain's job is to remind us of all the possible things you don't want to happen. And it happens during the day, but it also happens during the night. And so having vivid dreams is a very normal part of being a human being and being someone who has fear. So yes, that's my experience.
And nocturnal panic attacks, they are common in panic disorders.
Very common, very common. Again, I wouldn't encourage dream analysis for that. I would encourage an anxiety specialist for that.
Yeah.
I've got a really interesting question. Someone said the sun is frozen, not doing much because he believes society and people's motives are corrupt. How do I approach him and change his belief?
It's interesting. I hear, and we can't comment too much without hearing what's going on fully there. But obviously there is some anxieties there, some paranoia, maybe. Well, not all paranoia. The British government, there's no paranoia there. But in general, kind of like if it's an extreme, there's nothing wrong with being critically reflective and criticizing the powers that be. You know, we live in a democratic society, that's okay. But when it's like to the point where you'd feel like it was kind of extreme, when you feel like it was excessive, it was consuming and excessive, to the point where the person isolated themselves, didn't trust loved ones around them, definitely try and encourage them, maybe talk and things like that, because it could actually can be a symptom, particularly paranoia. I'm not saying the person is paranoid, but if it could be a sign of paranoia. And if it is paranoia, that could be, just could be a sign that someone kind of has an ongoing condition that they need some help with. That said, it's completely okay to question the powers that be and have your own autonomy and independence or whatever. That's what I'm saying. But I'm hearing and it's hinting at concern from the question. If you feel that the person is acting out of character and they're developing this kind of insular, anti-establishment paranoia kind of thing, definitely try and get another kind of opinion and intervention on that, because there's other things that could be associated with it that do need intervention, and I know that from my personal life and professional life.
Great answer. Absolutely fantastic, that, Josh. Next question. How to overcome anxiety when it comes to homework? I know you guys used to go to school, some sooner than others. And
Tough room.
Can you give any papyrus then?
Rock, chisel everything
around. Can you give any advice regarding being able to do your homework? Kim.
I'm a big advocate for putting in a B- effort. I find that the people who go in looking for A+ and put perfectionistic expectations on themselves either panic the entire time or end up avoiding and procrastinating because.
Just to add, Kim, what do you do when it's your parents who are putting that pressure on them then?
Tell them to shut up. I'm sorry.
The same thing. I mean, The parents can wish for an A+, but the parents too have to recognize that pressure on children makes them perform not well. And so pressure can help it to some degree, but I think the main thing to remind them is if the pressure is actually reducing effectiveness of studying and performance, well, then it's not working. I think that the B minus is really saying you're doing the best you can with what you have. You're putting in an effort. You're trying, but you're taking away the expectation of perfection, because the truth is, whether it's coming from a parent or a teacher or yourself or your anxiety disorder, perfection is not realistic. It's not super helpful. If you do have a parent who is incredibly putting a lot of pressure on, you may want to be as gentle and practice the self-compassion piece, because there is nothing harder than having a parent who conditionally places that kind of expectation on you. So yeah, I would, and then I would also ask for support. I mean, there's a lot of options in terms of support through teachers and tutoring and things like that, that can help you work through your anxiety as you study. A lot of my clients who have homework anxiety, we do it together, meaning they sit down and do their homework, and I'm there helping them to challenge any faulty beliefs they have, or to interrupt them if they're off starting to ruminate and so forth. So that may be helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Drew, I think we should go to some of the questions in the room. I saw a really good one there. Someone saying, did any of you find the root cause of my anxiety? I don't know if you can see that one to pop it on the screen.
I'll put it up on the screen. It's right here.
Yeah, so did any of you find a root cause to anxiety? My therapist is leaning on this big time. I'll just give... I love Josh's analogy of the stress jug. So the everyday stresses of what's happening in your life building up, and then bam, it gets too much, and then an anxiety disorder could occur. Because I really feel that happened in my situation, especially with my father passing away. I then tried to go into work and do things as normal without actually sitting down with the grief and going through that. But regarding root causes, I don't know what you guys feel about that. I know that a lot of therapists do try and lean into that, but I'm not sure if it's the right approach to go with, Josh. How do you feel about someone sitting down and trying to find the root cause of an anxiety disorder?
Me?
Yes.
So, one of the most important parts of therapy, and I think it's the most important part, is the formulation. So people of the cognitive behavioral realms, the weirdos like Kim and I, what we'll do is we'll sit there and we will formulate what we feel is happening. And this is an ongoing process. Now, is it possible to be anxious and have panic attacks and there be a direct cause? Yeah, that is possible. But in the general consensus is most anxiety disorders do not have a narrative root cause. There's usually an accumulation of things, as well as tied in with genetics. So when I developed an anxiety disorder, it was that. It was there was a lot of things going on. There was grief. There was things like that, and obviously there was things in my stress jug that we call that have been laying dormant in there for years that I've ignored. When something really happened, something stressful happened in my life, and I was required to be a carer for my brother, and hearing bad news, and I was grieving and stuff like that, the stress jug went from here, that was full of all the crap from when I was younger, but wasn't affecting my life really, to fill all the way up until one day, I wasn't looking after myself properly, exhausted, worried, etc., and then bang, I had this response, this anxious response from nowhere, and it frightened the hell out of me. Now, when something frightens the hell out of you out of nowhere, you don't want it to happen again, and that causes panic disorder. It also creates a misfiring threat response that starts to skew your perspective of things as well. So suddenly not only was I scared of panic attacks and thinking I was going crazy, I was misinterpreting symptoms and sensations, which I know Drew is very familiar with. And it's just like, what's going on here? Now, I did seek out therapists, and this is what's really important. The sad thing is, and I say this, and the sad thing is, a lot of people have to do their own kind of formulation. A lot of people have to go, right, is this an anxiety disorder or not? Because not every therapist is trained, and particularly in the UK, the vast majority of them, well, private therapists, because there's so many modalities, it's sometimes not picked up. So if you're going to a therapist and you're saying, I'm having panic attacks, a therapist of a certain modality might think, well, that panic attack must come from somewhere, a root event or a root fear. Whereas someone who's trained in anxiety disorders will just go, oh, it just sounds like you're fearing fear. So for me personally, I can't comment because I've not been there with your therapist. I'm only going by your comment there. But I'd ask you, I'd say, is it just a fear and misinterpretation of fear? Or is there something specific? And to be honest, it's pretty, usually in my experience, pretty obvious when there's something specific, you know. And when there's something specific with it, when it comes to anxiety, it's usually associated with PTSD, because there's usually a same trigger that reoccurs all the time that's pretty quickly identified. But not many people actually suffer with PTSD. I mean, there's people bang around the word trauma all the time, but actually PTSD is in the very vast minority of people that struggle with anxiety. So yeah, I would say to yourself, and it's got to be you, like, question if your therapist is trained in anxiety disorders, but also have a think about, do I have an anxiety disorder here? What's going on here? And then feel free to change your therapist. I did, you know, and it's helpful. You need someone who's trained in it, I think. But otherwise, particularly with kind of anxiety disorders where we fixate, like OCD and stuff like that, finding root causes to stuff can actually have the opposite effect. And you can start to feed an obsession and feed the need to fix when the opposite is required. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I want to add, because I know for some people, and that's why I left this question up on the screen, accepting emotions when you suppose they have something at their root to solve. So I think the idea of a root cause, or our emotions telling us something, or intuition is telling us something, like we're often fed those sort of emotionally based messages. And I'm not saying they're bad, but I like to use, one of the things that has helped me is to use an analogy that kind of serves both masters to a certain extent. And that is the fire and the match analogy. So if you assume that your anxiety disorder is a fire that's burning and your root cause was the match, you can't blow out the match and then think that the fire will go out. So at some point, those two things might exist together, but once they've become decoupled and I'm just afraid of my own heartbeat now, and I'm afraid of the panic itself, I'm afraid of the thoughts themselves, then you probably have two problems, and you can work on two problems. That's okay. But sometimes people get really run into a corner because on an emotional level, they want there to be a root cause. They believe emotionally or spiritually that there must be a root cause, and it causes them to, well, I have to pick one of the two. Well, maybe it's both. It could be both, but there's too many people, at least in my community, that spend a long time digging for that root cause, and they can't find it. And somebody actually in the comments said it made it worse because I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
So
I'm just about not finding it.
It was an undiagnosed theme of my OCD, in the sense that I was doing really well and I hadn't had OCD for ages. And I think I've told you this a few times, but when I was trained to be a therapist, there was this over sensationalism of trauma in the body. Now, if you give someone with like susceptible to like contamination OCD or whatever, I had like health OCD. You give someone like that the notion that there's a hidden, unseen trauma that's trapped within you that you can't get. I lost my shit. I was like, what the hell? What's going on? That, like, there's something in me I need to get out. I started to think, I was like, I needed to be exercised and stuff like that. And I literally did. I went and did things like biodynamic breath work and convulsed my body for hours, which, by the way, was a really trippy experience. But I was convulsed my body for hours to exercise myself from the hidden trauma that occurred. So it's a complicated one, because therapists in general, they believe in what they do, and they've been taught that modality is fantastic and you should worship it, whatever. And that's why I always go with the integrative therapist, because it's like they've got more of a widespread tool set, you know. So if people come to, and again, it always comes back to formulation, that first session. Do you feel understood? Do you feel like they're on the same page as you? So I'm really good at formulating a therapist. I'm sure a therapist, but when it comes to formulation, that's how it's good. And I'll sit there and go, what is actually happening here? Sometimes, you know, someone will come to you with panic attacks, and actually, yeah, they're having panic attacks because they're being bullied at work. And yeah, their brain is saying threat, 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 panic, panic. And you don't do exposure work for that, because if you're bullied, it's a legitimate thing. You don't want to.
Right.
The
The root
Yeah.
cause is usually very evident pretty quickly, right? Like, there's usually sort of like the saying we would have is like, oh, that makes complete sense. Oh, you had a death in the family. That makes complete sense. I think the main thing to remember here is I could easily identify a root cause of my anxiety pretty quickly, right? A few events that very much triggered it. But if the focus of the therapy is to figure that out, it is likely you're going in the wrong direction. The other thing for folks to remember is you don't have to know the root cause to recover, ever. You don't have to.
100%.
You can find it. For me, it was very quick. With session number 1, okay, we know exactly why you have this anxiety. Some people, it comes out throughout the course of treatment. Oh, okay, now that makes sense. We can make sense that you have it. But if it's the goal of therapy, that may be a red flag. But you don't ever have to have solved that root cause to recover.
I think it's
it's a very Hollywood thing as well, isn't it?
Right.
Sorry, Drew.
Exactly what I want to
It's
say.
a very
Do you remember the Prince of
sensational-
Tides movie, Josh? Did you ever see the movie Prince of Tides? It's an older movie.
Is it good?
I call it the Prince of. Well, as a therapist, you might actually like it, and so much of it takes place in the therapist's office. And Hollywood portrays that like eureka moment where the breakthrough happens and everything falls into place. And I think it drives us to want that so bad. Like if I could just find the moment, then this will all go away. And
yeah. Similar, like The Sopranos does the same thing. One of my favorite shows ever. And Tony Soprano sat there in the office with Dr. Melfi, and he's sitting there. He's wondering why he's getting panic attacks. It's literally season 1 of The Sopranos is all about Tony Soprano having panic attacks. And then he finally realizes why he's having panic attacks, because bam, that was it. This very Hollywood sensationalized narrative. I'm afraid of the ducks because the ducks are flying away. I don't care if this is a spoiler. Sopranos is ancient. You should get on with it and watch it anyway. And the ducks fly away. Bam, I'm having panic attacks because I realized my own mother wants to kill me. Boom, amazing TV. Watch it, but it's nothing to do with your anxiety disorder.
Yeah. Me finding my root cause didn't take away any work. I still had to do every single step of recovery. I still had to go through the whole thing. That finding this root cause wasn't like, oh, you're healed. If only therapy was that easy.
Yeah.
I still had to do this, use the skills and the tools and all the things.
So, Josh, would you say that that's down to the modalities of the therapist? The more likely, some therapists are more likely to delve deeper into trying to find that root cause. And also, just a second question with that: what reason do you think there is that we don't have a more broader spectrum, that therapists can have all these different modalities? Why is it that we have therapists that are specialists only in 1 or 2 different modalities?
Good question. There's all kind of reasons for it. For me, and it's the discussion I've had briefly with Kim, is that the powers that be want empirical evidence for proof. But the limits of empiricism is that you cannot measure things like humanistic therapy, which I've had personally some of the most powerful breakthroughs through over a long period of time. There's no way to document that apart from me saying that really helped, and so when you've got the behavior sciences like CBT, which I also love, MCT, that's great, and that can be measured quite specifically. You've got like a cohort of 12 to 16 sessions, this modality only. How did you feel before it? How did you feel after it? And there's some kind of measurable quantity there. Whereas sometimes you go into like personal therapy without an anxiety disorder, let's say you're just exploring stuff, and sometimes after 12 sessions, it can feel worse, but actually, and for me it did, because I went down a route that I really needed to explore. This was separate from anxiety disorders and a fear of fear. This is me exploring myself as a man and my prejudices, my introjections, everything who I was. And at the end of it, it was one of the best things I ever did. Now, both helped. CBT therapy helped, and this helped. So for me, which is the most important question in therapy, what would you like to get from these sessions with me? And that's what you aim for. Now, if the answer to that is I want to stop having panic attacks because I fear them, then the modality should be the kind of cognitive behavioral route.
Yeah.
If it's I want to know why I get angry around a certain person, why I'm prejudiced towards this when I don't want to be, why do I feel worthless, then you can go down another route too. Of course, it's not easily explained. Everyone just thinks a therapist knows everything and is trained in every modality.
Yeah.
But it should be more widely available. I had no idea what on earth I was doing when I was that. But yeah, thankfully, you can get there, and a good therapist can signpost you that too. Also, a good therapist will know their limitations. If the therapist believes that their modality only is the thing that can get you better, that's a red flag. Now, I will happily pass on some clients that I've had where I've gone, I don't think I'm trained enough for this, and that's what makes me a good therapist, not the fact that I think I can help everyone.
That's great to hear.
I want to ask a question about that. I think this is a good conversation, right? So I'm going to ask the two as a therapist in training, as a graduate student in counseling, why, and this is a thing that you hear all the time, right? So, and I've heard you guys talk about it. I hear Allegra talk about it. Like everybody talks about it, and it's important, right? So, really,
I really thought he was here then.
I know it popped up, and I was like, no.
I was like, how?
Josh is like stimulating the troll.
It was Josh the whole time.
I knew it.
He's
taken the screen mask off.
I
He's
knew
got
it.
troll Tourette's.
For people watching, I private messaged Kimberly imitating the troll that we all know from Instagram.
True. But I don't know what's worse, that or me putting a comment that's funny and then putting it on the screen myself. Like, that's the worst. I'm the worst. All right. So the question I have is, we talk all the time, like, you got to be careful of unqualified practitioners and unethical coaches and that sort of stuff, which I'm totally on board with. And, one of the things that therapists will talk about is supervision. There's supervision, there's clinical supervision, which is an important thing, right? But when the Gestalt therapist is jamming that down the throat of the patient for 8 months that has agoraphobia or an eating disorder, where's the supervisor? Can you guys answer that? Because I think people sort of want to know. Isn't it up to, or is the supervisor also a dyed-in-the-wool Gestalt therapist and like, no, keep going, we're going to do this? Like, where's the supervision that says 8 months later, this patient is still stuck in the same spot, something's wrong?
Great question.
What happens there?
Well, I think that's the fact is that psychology is not a science, unfortunately. It's not. It is a science. Sorry. But the problem here, and I will give you an example, is my internship was at a psychodynamic center. I'm an OCD specialist. My very first OCD client came to me. I was a new intern, and I was using the "How do you feel?" therapy about how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
What I hear you
saying.
How do you
feel about that? And that was how I was trained. And my client actually came to me and said, I'm terminating sessions because I Googled it and I heard that ERP is the right therapy. And I went to my supervisor and they said, oh, yeah, no, that's not going to work. And that's what I was trained to believe. What? I was told.
Oh, damn.
Yes. So yeah. I remember that. I remember that's the very first time I ever heard the words ERP, right? Was from a client who was terminating with me because I was using how do you feel about that therapy? And so I think the thing to remember here is, and sort of it was a big piece of my work and my mission is hopefully we can spread the word enough so that more clinicians and professors. I've gone head to head with professors in their Allegra Castens was in training. She had a professor who said ERP is a complete load of crap. I went head to head with him in front of his students and won because there are many people who don't want to listen to the science. But that's the truth is, I think now we have, as consumers, we have to do our own research and make sure we're getting the treatment we know is correct as well, unfortunately, because therapists can, believe what they want to believe. Sorry, that's not very inspiring, but that
was a good answer. Thank you very much. That's actually really
it's passionate though, because it's such a convoluted area. Like I think the question is your therapist willing to consider the science? Like, for me, I use both. I'm a humanistic therapist that has no empirical backing, but I love it, and I use empirically backed science. And now, for me, what makes me a good therapist is that I consider the science. So it's like, okay, we need to consider this here. But unfortunately, there is a lot of kind of dogmatic modalities out there, and I know because I often get into debates with them all, which I win. And they're always like, "Oh no, you're this and that. You're contributing and propagating the medicalization of mental health." And it's just like, I'm not though, really. Like that's not really what I'm doing. I'm just considering what's best for my client. Boom, mic drop. See you later.
Yeah.
Guys, I think we're at the hour mark, so I think that was pretty decent. And we managed to get through. We've had Josh playing peekaboo. We've had Josh revealing himself as the troll, which is fantastic. But we've done it. We've got through the first one. Drew, I just want to say a huge thank you for setting everything up behind the scenes, especially with the new website. Everyone, if you want to go and check it out, it's on the new Instagram, which is it's Recovery Room Live. And then if you click the link in the bio, there you go, recoveryroomlive.com. I think we should do it again next week. I'm really looking forward to seeing this different avenue that we're taking and see where we'll get it. Kim, what are you working on this week? Are we having another week off just before the winter comes in, or are you? Well, it doesn't look like winter behind you though. It looks like summer.
Yeah, we don't have winter in California.
Oh, no.
No, it's gonna. No, we're always in the warm. So no. I am doubling down. The book launch is going wonderfully. I have a new book called The Self-Compassion Workbook for OCD, and I'm just taking time practicing what I preach.
Fantastic.
I ordered that book. It comes on November the 4th. And what are they doing? Yeah, like,
Sold out. You overran their printing capacity.
I did.
Yeah. So I've not read it yet, Kim, but I've ordered it.
I hope you enjoy it. Apparently overseas people like having a hard time getting a hold of it. I understand.
Oh, good. I am excited to read it.
Cool.
Drew, what are you working on this week? Anything?
I'm working on. No, it's the end of the week. I think I'm done working on stuff right now. I'm taking a break.
Next week, are we working on anything? Are we still on vacation mode?
No, I just have a ton of stuff going on. We're working on this new. I'm not going to talk about that now. We'll talk about that later. This new community site that I'm pretty excited about. So we're putting a lot of work into that, but I'll talk about that some other time. Right now, it's just Friday, and I'm good with that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Josh, are we working on anything?
I'm going to be recording the rest of the audio book of Untangle Your Anxiety this weekend. I've done the first 6 chapters, which I've done pretty well with. But yeah, it is really time consuming. But once you get into it, you get into it. So I'll be finishing Untangle Your Anxiety audiobook this weekend.
Luckily, you have an amazing audiobook producer, luckily. So you'll be all right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we have. Drew's doing
Yeah, I've heard that he's actually giving away free promotion of free production on the first one, which is fantastic.
Well, wait a minute. Hang on a second here.
I heard that as well, yeah.
Oh, good. Anyway.
Right. Well, thank you very much, guys. And Drew, I think
roll the clip.
Roll the clip.
Roll the clip. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Take it.